you join me at East Elf Lakes near Peterborough. It's now early June and in most lakes across the country the carp have now spawned. So in this video I'd like to show you how I go about tackling post-spawning carp, and hopefully we can catch a few fish along the way to demonstrate the tackle and the tactics that I use. So the one noticeable difference with my approach at this time of year is with regards to my baiting approach. In the early part of the spring, leading up to when the fish spawn, I do use a lot of natural baits such as maggots and worms, and also sweet corn particles as well. But once those fish have spawned, I do think the fish search out quality food items that help them to repair and recover from the ordeals of spawning. So for that reason, I do switch over to a high protein bait such as boilies and pellets. I like to use the Pro Stim liver mixed with the Pacific tuna. That's not specific to this time of year, that's something I do all the time anyway. I do like to mix those two baits. I find that combo works so well together. I also feel with the Pro Stim and the Pacific tuna, they do have quite a high salt content, and I think that's again something that the fish do seem to search for at this time of year. Once we move towards the latter part of the summer, I do find myself switching back over and incorporate. Oh, we're away! A live bite. This rod had to go. It was on an absolutely banging spot. He's doing his best to get underneath these trees here. I'm not going to let that happen. I don't know why I'm backwinding. I've never backwound for years. What am I doing? That's a better sound. So he's just plodding around under the rod tip now. The margins are really deep here. In fact, the bank's quite undercut as well, so you do find they do make a beeline for the margins where it's so undercut. He's woken up now. I thought it was almost beat when he was by my feet. There he is. He's there. Come on, keep your head up. Yes, we got him. And there we go, we're off the mark. Well, I just dropped that rig back in the bait boat to send it back out, and just as I was doing so, the other rods rattled off. We're playing our second fish. Lovely chunky common, that one. Here we go. Get in. Yes! Almost a double bubble. There we go. Lovely chunky one. Right, let's get this boat back out on that spot and then we'll take a look at what we've got in the net. So, let's get the rod back out on the first spot that did a bite. As I was saying before I caught that first fish, as we move towards the end of summer, my baiting approach does change. Once the fish have had a whole spring and a whole summer of angling pressure, they can become a lot trickier to catch, and I do find myself having to sometimes resort to using maggots and worms and sort of scratching bait, scratching tactics just to get a bite. But at this time of year, I do feel like a positive approach with the boilies and pellets is often the way forward. Well, so far we've talked about the type of bait I use at this time of year, but what we haven't talked about is the quantity of bait. And it really is hard to say, because obviously when we're talking about how much bait to put in, every venue is different, and there's so many factors and variables to consider, such as the stock of fish, the size of fish, weather conditions, all of which can influence the amount of bait that I use on a session, and of course the length of session as well. But what I would say is, in the immediate period after the fish have spawned, you will find they can often be in quite a dour mood. They've gone through quite an ordeal, and it's a lot of stress and a lot of pressure on the fish that they've gone through. So a lot of people think they may be immediately back on the feed. I know it's different for humans. Once we've done the job, we always want a snack afterwards. It's not quite the same with fish. So I would certainly play it by ear. I would watch the lake, see what signs there are of feeding fish. So here we've arrived and there hasn't been many signs of feeding fish at all. A few little fizzes here and there, but nothing that would tell me these fish are on it and feeding hard. So for that reason, I've just been using small quantities of bait, just a handful of bait over each spot, really small quantities of bait. A week or two following spawning, then the fish have had enough time to recover for them to get back on the feed. So then it's more usual for me to use larger quantities of bait. The best tool you can use to decide how much bait to put in is your eyes. Looking around the lake, looking for signs of feeding fish, whether it's fizzing or head and shouldering. And if the fish look like they're up for a bit of bait, then you can introduce it. But generally speaking, at this time of year, I would still err on the side of caution. Just introduce small quantities of bait, perhaps feel your way into the session, and then you can apply more bait if you need to. Well, there we go. This is actually the second fish I caught this session. You can see there he has got a few lifted scales, so signs that these fish have indeed spawned. I always carry some carp care kit with me on every session anyway, but at this time of year it is worth looking at the fish in a bit more detail to see if they have got any spawning damage that needs treating. I mean, this, although it does have a few lifted scales, it's nothing that needs any immediate treatment or anything like that. In fact, I'd say he's in really, really good condition. Nice solid fish of about 15 pound, something like that. Lovely chunky fish, that one. Right, let's slip this one back and we'll take a look at the first fish that we caught. Well, this was the fish that kicked this session off. We've got a very long, lean mirror, which has clearly just spawned out. Probably about 14 pounds, something like that. It's got a few lifted scales on this side, but other than that, none the worse for wear following spawning. Like I said, with the other fish, it is worth checking them over, see if they do need any treatment. But in this case, I think the best thing we can do is just slip them back as quickly as possible. Now, when it comes to the rigs and presentation, they don't really change for me throughout the year. I just use whatever rig I feel is appropriate given the situation I'm in. So if I want a pop-up presentation, then I would generally use a hinge stiff rig. And if I want a bottom bait presentation, it would be either a blowback rig or a 360 rig. What does change, however, are the hook baits. Through the winter and spring months, I do prefer to use bright hook baits. Yellows seem to be my favourite in the winter months. pinks in the spring, but once the fish have spawned, I find myself using match the hatch hook bait, something that blends in. Again, it goes back to what I was talking about earlier. By now the fish have started to see large amounts of angling pressure, and I do think they can shy away from bright hook bait. So during the summer months in general, I often fish with a match the hatch hook bait, either a airball pop-up or an airball wafter. With the wafters, I do also trim them down to make them a little bit uneven in shape, and it also makes sure that they sink under the weight of the hook, but the hook is still laying flat on the lake bed. I don't want the hook to be off the lake bed in any way, so I just trim it so that the hook bait sinks nice and slow, but the hook itself is laid flat on the lake bed. And that would be my approach as we move through the summer. But as we go into the autumn and winter, then the hook baits can change again. But that's another subject for another time. So this is actually the rig I've been using today. It's a very, very simple blowback rig, tied using 25-pound Camotex soft hook link, which is a coated braided material. You can see there's a little bit of the coating exposed just above the hook, or just above the shrink tube exiting the hook, just to create a little bit extra movement there. And the hook bait, as I mentioned before, is a match the hatch pro stem liver wafter, which has been whittled down to make it a little bit more irregular in shape, and also make sure that it isn't too buoyant. So yeah, that is a really, really simple setup. It's a setup I use for pretty much all my bottom bait fishing. It's caught me loads of fish over the past, and I'm sure it will continue to do so in the years to come. I'm away, I'm away. I'm away, I'm away, I'm away. Well, we were just about to do a closing piece to camera to wrap up this session. And as we were doing so, the rod's ripped off. The fish is now swimming 100 miles an hour towards me. And there he is, on the top. This one's turbocharged. Going straight for this margin, like all the fish have so far this trip. And there he is, just popped up. I think he's tired himself out on that initial run. There you go, get in. Oh, well, we've made it a hat trick. Right, let's have a quick look at this one. Well, here we have a lovely clean mirror of about 12-13 pound to cap off what's been a very enjoyable session. So a quick recap: at this time of year, switch over to your high protein baits like your pellets and your boilies. Don't go introducing large amounts of bait at the start. See how the fish are feeding before introducing any quantities of bait. Always carry carp care equipment and treat any open wounds or sores, and ditch the bright hook baits and switch over to the match the hatch. Right, let's slip him back and I'll catch you next time.